I love to tell the story of unseen things above, of Jesus and His glory, of Jesus and His love. I love to tell the story because I know 'tis true. It satisfies my longings as nothing else can do. I love to tell the story, 'twill be my theme in glory, to tell the old story of Jesus and His love.
Know anything at all about the Kinsey Reports? The Kinsey Reports go back to, the first one was in 1948. It was on the sexual behavior of the human male. Alfred Kinsey was a professor of zoology at Indiana University. And so here you had these books coming out, and the second one came out in 1953. It was on the female. And these received a lot of attention and have continued to receive a good bit of attention. So almost everybody has heard of them and know a little bit about them. But one of the reasons was that the media jumped all over this, because this gave the media an excuse to write about these things that they really wanted to write about all along, but it was too delicate of an issue to talk about these sexual topics like adultery and prostitutes and all this stuff. And so with these books coming out, they were now enabled. And so the media jumped all over it, and so it became a very, very popular issue and topic. In fact, today, there's a statistic that's thrown around frequently that was generated back here in the first book. And it is that 10% of the population is homosexual. Have you heard that statistic? 10% of the population is homosexual. Now, that seems like a very high number. In fact, it is a very high number, and it's an exaggeration. But that's what Kinsey reported. And so he interviewed a lot of people. In fact, for this book, he interviewed 5,000 males in the United States to determine their sexual behavior. More than that for the females, a whole slew of those. So a lot of interviews, so a lot of statistics that they gathered together. Because it was statistical in nature, a lot of statisticians then looked at the research methods that Kinsey used in putting his books together. For example, for that 10% number, you have to understand that of the 5,000 men that he interviewed, 25% of them had been convicted of sex crimes. And most of them were in jail when he interviewed them. So a little bit of a slant in the sample that he pulled together. In fact, the statisticians who looked at all this said that you would get more reliable results with a random sample of 3 people. What the statisticians were really saying is you can't rely upon any of that statistical information in these books because the samples were so ridiculous. As people looked at this and talked about it, it's a matter of what Kinsey's opinion was going in. I mean, Kinsey had this strong interest in sexual deviance, and so he was interested in that and seeing that as common in the population. And so his reports reflect it. And that's a problem that we face in general with what we see, that opinion dominates over fact. And we're going to talk about opinions, we're going to talk about certainty, and we're going to talk about facts. In this lesson today, as we look at this scriptural story about the tribes of Israel and a fight over an altar, is that it boils down to these issues concerning some opinions and certainty and facts. So we're going to come down to those. Well, the questions this morning, how do people form their opinions? How do we form our opinions? Not just us, but people in general. How do they form an opinion? We all have them.
What they've been exposed to.
What they've been exposed to. All right, what else?
They've been taught.
What they've been taught. That has some strong influence on what people's opinions will be. What else?
What they've experienced.
What experience is a big part of it. So it's the teaching, the experience. When you have all these experiences and you have what these things that you're taught, then how do you take that and form an opinion? Or does it just happen? that all of a sudden there's an opinion in there. How do we come to that opinion?
Well, if you base your opinion on the word of the Bible within modern day, then you can.
All right, so you have some guidelines that you're going by, maybe something that you've been taught because of your experiences. You've set up some guidelines. Yeah, I think if you ask a lot of people, how do you come to the opinions that you have formed? How do you do that? I think a lot of them would say, well, I take all the facts. I take the things I've been taught. I take the experiences that I've had, and I weigh those things, and I try to determine what the truth is, and that's what my opinion is. It's the truth that I have derived from all this stuff that I've experienced and I've been taught. I mean, isn't that kind of what we would like to say about how we form that opinion? However, do we form our opinions that way?
I'm a narrow-minded Southern.
We're all more narrow-minded than we like to admit. I don't think that's the way most people form their opinions. But let's back up for a second. What's the difference between opinion and fact?
Yours is opinion, mine's fact.
All right.
You have your own opinion, but the facts are the facts. And that's the truth.
Okay. All right, so the facts would be truth. What about the opinion, though? The opinion doesn't have to be truth necessarily, does it? As I can have an opinion about something that doesn't have any relationship to the truth at all, other than maybe be contrary to it. It's just an opinion. When we say that that's my opinion, then you don't automatically conclude that that is a fact. However, as Harry implied, if I'm expressing my opinion, then my opinion is just as good as a fact, isn't it? Because in my mind, that's the truth. However, it's probably not. In the interest of Joe Friday and just the facts man. In fact, didn't Joe always have a problem? Because he always had to keep saying just the facts, just the facts. Why did he have to keep saying that? Because the people were always expressing opinions about things, and they weren't getting to the facts. And all Joe wanted was the facts. What do you think would be, and nobody knows the answer to this question, I certainly don't, so anything you say is okay. What do you think is the percentage of our opinions that are facts? Now, not your own, because we'll look at the rest of the world outside yourself. But outside yourself, if you were to take the opinions that people hold, what percentage of them do you think would actually be true? 25%?
Depending on which channel you watch.
Which channel? All right. Anyway, percentage is probably not too high, is it? It might be 25, it might be something significantly higher than that. I don't know what that number is. But opinions are everywhere. We all have plenty of those. And they may not bear too much of a relationship to truth and facts. So why do we prefer certainty over uncertainty? Why do people prefer certainty? Well, we really do like to have things fixed, right? Certain, known. Why do we like that so much better than we like uncertainty?
You may not like what? Uncertainty.
All right, yeah, we might not like what that's going to turn out to be, right? What else?
You can hang your hat on that.
Okay. So something that we know is there, then we can depend upon that, and so that helps us to move forward in a direction that is consistent with that. So there are some positive things about the certainty that help us live our lives in a more consistent manner, perhaps. The uncertainty is a burden, isn't it? And that's why I put the question mark on the guy's back. Because if there is uncertainty, then that is a burden that because we don't know exactly what's coming next. We don't know how to proceed. Stressful. It is stressful.
Bill, I think we all want to try to control life.
Aha. And we want to be in control, right?
That's right.
Yes. Yes. And we can do that better if we have that certainty out there, don't we? And if there's uncertainty, then we feel out of control. And when we feel out of control, we're not at all comfortable. Not at all comfortable. When we look at people who are certain about something, now if your opinion is very strong over here, I'm not dealing facts now, but your opinion is very strong over here, and somebody has a very strong opinion that's contrary to that, then you may not be applauding them and thinking that this is wonderful that they're so certain. But in general, if you just take something you don't know a whole lot about, but it's maybe a significant topic, and you find this expert who is very certain, speaks with a great deal of authority on this particular topic, we tend to respect greatly that individual, don't we?
No, not always.
But when we don't, it is typically because it is something that's contradicting an opinion we already hold. But if, in fact, we don't have an opinion on a particular topic, but it is a significant topic, and you're hearing somebody who is speaking with this authority, with this certainty about that particular topic, then we tend to have respect for that individual. We tend to feel pretty confident in that individual's authority, and we tend to admire that individual.
Opinions are like noses. Everybody has one.
Everybody has one. Actually, they have a whole lot of them. And spend a little time with them and give them the opportunity, and they'll let you have as many as you want. No extra charge. But isn't it true that when that person speaks with certainty, then they tend to gain the respect and the admiration of other people? If you don't know a whole lot about a particular topic and somebody stands up to talk about that particular topic and they don't really know what they're talking about and they're bouncing around all over the place, you're just saying, well, he's just as dumb as I am, right? And so there's nothing to be gained by listening to this individual, but when that person stands up there and speaks with authority and speaks with certainty, then that's convincing, and people tend to move in that direction. But if you tune to a news channel, I'm going to skip the news channels for a moment because we all have strong prejudices about those. I'm going to talk about, and maybe none of you ever watch any of these, but if you don't, I would encourage you to do it just for an hour or two, just to kind of watch one. A business channel. You know, there are basically three: Fox, CNBC, and Bloomberg. But if you watch those, any one of them, you'll find experts on. I mean, there are all these experts who are going to speak quite authoritatively on their topics about what the market is going. Business channel is a misnomer. They're not business channels. They're stock market channels. I mean, they deal with what's going on in the stock market, which is not quite the same thing as business. I mean, it's a portion of it, but it's not the same thing. Anyway, what you'll find is you have all these experts appearing. And if you stay on for an hour, you'll almost certainly going to hear one expert say this, and you'll hear another expert just convincingly say just the opposite. Some channels, you may have to wait a little longer than an hour to hear the other opinion, but even the business channels are quite opinionated. And they are dealing with opinions. And the hosts are more opinionated than the guests. The news channels are even worse. That's why I cannot watch the news anymore. I haven't watched the news in a long time. Can't watch them anymore. There's nothing but opinion. You're not getting news. You're getting opinion. That authority, that certainty works. When people speak with that authority and speak with that certainty, it wins over people who have not already formed a contrary opinion. And if they have already formed a similar opinion, then it really wins them over. I mean, this is great. Here's somebody who's agreeing with me, and we all like to hear an expert who agrees with me. That's what we want to hear. We want to hear somebody supporting my opinion. Because now my opinion is even closer to fact, isn't it? It is closer to truth because I now have this expert and another expert. And the more experts I can gather who agree with my opinion looks a whole lot more like truth. Why is it so difficult to change an opinion? All right. In our own opinion, we're not likely to change that quickly, are we? Because a couple of things. One, if we already believe it's true, then, this is the opposite, so what's wrong? And so I might be viewed as stupid, or I might be viewed as foolish. I might even start to look at myself a little differently now. Well, maybe I messed up. That couldn't be. We wouldn't mess up. We wouldn't choose error over truth, would we? Ever? Yes, we would. And we do. We just don't like to admit it. And so to change that opinion once it's formed is not an easy thing for ourselves, or if you're dealing with somebody who has already formed an opinion on something and you want to convince them of something else. How easy is that? If you're going to convince a Muslim that Jesus is who we believe he is, how easy is that going to be? Bottom line is, you will not do it. The Holy Spirit can do it, and He may use you to accomplish it. But it can be difficult. It will not be an easy thing once an opinion is formed. The movie clip I have for you this morning is from the movie Doubt. This is a fine movie. The movie involves Meryl Streep, who plays a nun who is the principal of a Catholic school in Brooklyn in 1964. Philip Seymour Hoffman plays Father Flynn, who is the priest over the church and the school. Sister Aloysius believes that Father Flynn may be molesting a boy. This is not about a priest and a boy. This is about doubt. It's really about doubt. She is convinced, in her opinion, he is a child molester. She has no evidence other than her opinion based upon her experience. Amy Adams plays a young Sister James who is a teacher in the school, and she gets involved in reporting some information to the principal about the father and this young boy. In the early 60s, the Catholic Church, as everything went through a lot of change in the 60s, Catholic Church had Vatican II. That's where they switched over from the services being held in Latin to English. Big transition. And lots of other things were going on. The church was making changes, modernizing. And Sister Aloysius has been a nun for a long, long time. She's been a principal for a long, long time. She doesn't like ballpoint pens. She doesn't like girls wearing clips in their hair. She doesn't like all kinds of things because that's change, and she doesn't like change. Father Flynn, on the other hand, sort of represents Vatican II. He is the more progressive member of the clergy and is wanting to make these changes in the church to bring it along into the 20th century. And so he wants these changes. In addition to all that around Vatican II, another major change you had taking place in the early 60s was integration. The young boy in question here is the only black student in the school. He is the first black student to attend this Brooklyn Catholic school. His name is Donald Miller. The clip I'm going to show you is actually one scene, but I've taken a part out. The first part will be where Sister Aloysius has called Father Flynn into her office, and Sister James will be there as well. And they brought him in proposing to talk about the Christmas pageant. And he's quite happy to come in and talk about the Christmas pageant. While he's there, she blindsides him with a discussion about a concern she has about Donald Miller and his relationship with Donald Miller, that she believes that she knows, in her opinion, what might be going on between Father Flynn and Donald Miller. So there is this scene that takes place with the three of them in the office, and a little bit of confrontation. When it gets to the point where he's actually going to explain what took place, I cut that out. Because if you want to watch this film, I don't want to ruin that, and that's a very important part of the film. So I took it out. And then I'm going to pick it up in that office still, but after Father Flynn leaves, there's a discussion between Sister Aloysius and Sister James. Sister Aloysius has an opinion about a relationship between Father Flynn and Donald Miller.
What about Donald Miller?
We must be careful in the pageant that we neither hide Donald Miller nor put him forward.
Because of the color of his skin?
That's right.
Why?
Come, Father.
I think he should be treated like every other boy.
Well, you yourself singled the boy out for special attention. You held a private meeting with him at the rectory a week ago?
Yes.
What are we talking about?
Donald Miller?
The boy acted strangely when he returned to class.
Did you want to discuss the pageant? Is that why I'm here? Is this what you wanted to discuss?
This.
Well, I'm a little uncomfortable.
Why?
Why do you think?
The boy's well-being is my responsibility. What happened in the rectory?
Happened? Nothing happened. I had a talk with a boy.
What about?
Private matter.
He's 12 years old. What could be private?
I object to your tone.
This is not about my tone. Or your tone, Father Flynn. It's about arriving at the truth.
Of what?
You know what I'm talking about, don't you?
What exactly are you accusing me of?
I'm not accusing you of anything, Father Flynn. I am asking you to tell me what happened in the rectory.
I don't wish to continue this. And if you're dissatisfied with that, I suggest you speak to Monsignor Benedict.
Well,
Let this alone.
no.
You should have let it alone.
Not possible. You believe him?
Of course.
Isn't it that it's easier to believe him?
But we can corroborate his story with Mr. McGinn.
Yes. These types of people are clever.
Well, I'm convinced.
You're not. You just want things to be resolved so you can have simplicity back.
I want no further part of this.
I'll bring him down.
How can you be so sure that he is lying?
Experience.
You just don't like him. You don't like it that he uses a ballpoint pen. You don't like it that he takes 3 lumps of sugar in his tea. You don't like it that he likes Frosty the Snowman, and you are letting that convince you of something terrible, just terrible.
Don't you just love her? Meryl Streep can really get your blood boiling, I think, and she plays it very, very well. But anyway, she says it's not about my tone or your tone. It's about arriving at the truth. But how concerned do you think Sister Aloysius was in finding out what the truth was? She didn't like him. She had really no interest in the truth unless she could come up with some additional facts that would substantiate her opinion. That's what she wanted. And that's what we want most of the time. We're not really after the truth. We're really after finding some more facts to substantiate our opinion. She gave herself away when she said, I will take him down. We're going to talk about a story that takes place in the Promised Land after the Israelites went in to take possession of it. And so we're going to talk about the Promised Land. I want to review in Numbers 32 when the tribes were all camped out on the east side of the Jordan River and not quite ready to go in yet. Moses was still there and still in charge. And 2 of the tribes, Reuben and Gad, said, hey, this is great pasture land for our sheep, and we want to stay here rather than cross over the Jordan with you. So Moses, give us this land on the east side. Let this land be given to us for our inheritance. Well, Moses did not take kindly to that statement, and he says, basically, are you going to sit here on your rear ends while we go over there and fight? That's not the way it's supposed to be. Shall your brothers go to war while you sit here? Here, the 2 tribes, Reuben and Gad, say, you're right, we'll go over and we'll cross over with you and we'll fight with you, but we'll leave the women, the children, and the sheep and the goats and everything back over here on the land. And then once we have you all settled in, we'll come back and settle in this. And Moses and everybody says, that's fine. Half tribe of Manasseh joins in the discussion as well. So you have 2.5 tribes that have cut a deal to stay on the east side of the Jordan River. Now that has set them apart a little bit from the others, hasn't it? And that's important to remember as we go into this. But they've agreed to stay with the tribes and go over there and fight with them. I'm going to jump ahead now, jump to the end of the fighting. In those first chapters of Joshua, first 10 chapters of Joshua, we have them going in and fighting with all of these people and defeating these city kings. You had in the land, you have a bunch of city-states. That's too small for you to read, and I just want you to get the image of what's taking place rather than detail. But somebody has counted up that there were 31 kings that they defeated. The bottom line is there were lots of city-states, and so you basically had a king for the city and its surrounding area. And there are a bunch of those in there. Now, if you take Israel today, Palestine today, the West Bank today, then you end up pretty much with this territory that they're fighting for. And that territory today is about 1/4 the size of the state of Mississippi. To give you an idea as to how much territory we're talking about here, we're talking about 1/4 the size of the state of Mississippi. So Israel has 600,000 men. They're going in there and they're fighting against these kings in their individual cities. And God has hardened the hearts of those kings to fight. Because what has God told them to do in the land? And that is to annihilate everybody in it. Their order is to annihilate the people in the land. God has hardened the hearts of the kings, so they're going to fight. And so, in fact, they go in and they put up the resistance. That means battle. Then they're going to fight, and Israel's going to win, and Israel does win. So they capture the kings and kill the kings. And in some cases, they kill the people also, as they've been instructed to do. In other cases, they're not quite as diligent on that point, and they leave some behind. But in general, they go in and they capture most of these city-states, and they capture the territory. They kill the kings, and they are in control. The statement is Joshua took the whole land. And even in those places that they didn't control, particularly the area of the Philistines along the Mediterranean coast down here on the southern part, lots of Philistine cities still remain, city-states remained, and so that territory was not controlled for quite a while. Eventually it will be, but at this point it's not. But in general, Joshua took the whole land. God wanted them to divide the land, even that portion that they had not conquered yet, that of the Philistines. It was divided up to the people of Israel. So Joshua divided it up, gave it to these tribes, these 10 tribes on the western side. They get their territory. So basically, they've achieved what they set out to achieve. That is, they have conquered the land. It is now their possession. And so what happens to the 2.5 tribes? Well, in Joshua 22, the first 9 verses, Joshua calls the tribe of Reuben, the tribe of Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh, those who have their territory on the east side and have left their families back on the east side. They're still there. So he has called these fighters, these who have gone over with the others to fight for the land, and he calls them together and he says, you've kept all that Moses commanded, so you've done a good job. Now you may think, well, that's okay, that's not a big deal. They went over and they fought, so what? 7 years. It was 7 years that they fought in the land. So these men left their families behind for 7 years, joined with their brothers on the west side of the Jordan River and fought for their territory for 7 years. Now, after 7 years, Joshua calls them together and says, okay, you've done what the Lord has commanded of you through Moses, and so therefore you can go back. You can go to your tents, you can go to your flocks, you can go to your families on the east side, and you can take your land and you can settle, you can go home after 7 years. Well, now the story begins. You have the 12 tribes, all with their territories established. The 2.5 tribes have just been released by Joshua. And so as they start to go back to their homes, they get to the Jordan River and they stop. And they build an altar. They build an altar. Now, it was probably something like this. A bunch of stones stacked up, unhewn stones, so they're uncut, just pile them up as an altar. Altars like that were very common, not just for the Jewish people, but for all the idolaters worshiping all kinds of things. They would have an altar of some sort for sacrifice, and they would sacrifice their things on this altar. In fact, Joshua had built an altar, something similar to this, on Mount Ebal, by the tabernacle, When they were in the land, brought the tabernacle in the land, set the tabernacle up, one of the things they did was Joshua built an altar there. Need to keep that in mind as we go forward. But as the 2.5 tribes are returning home, they stopped by the Jordan River and built an altar. Now that could be a good thing or it could be a bad thing. Right now, we don't know what it is. It's just a thing. They built an altar. Now, if they built an altar to make sacrifices to God, this would be a problem. Because God says you're going to have one altar for me, for the sacrifices, and everybody will make their sacrifices on that altar. Well, Joshua built that altar by the tabernacle. If this is an altar for sacrifice, then this is a violation of God's command. And that's a big problem. Because every time that they have gone against what God has commanded them, the whole people have suffered. When Achan went to Ai and took the devoted things, people died. A lot of people died because of what took place, that falling away from what God had commanded. Well, if God's commanded one altar, now you've built two, there's a possibility that the whole people will suffer. On the other hand, what if it's not for sacrifice? We don't know what the altar's for. But anyway, the people of Israel, the 10 tribes in the land, get word of this. They heard that as somebody saw that the other 2.5 tribes built this altar by the Jordan, they went running back to the leaders and said, wait a minute, did you know that they built an altar by the Jordan? So what do? If you're Joshua and Eleazar, you jump to a conclusion, right? When you're the leader, you have to decide things. So they jump to a conclusion. The conclusion, this is a big problem for us. These people have done something terrible. They have done something that they've been commanded not to do. And therefore, let's get our army together, get all the other troops together, and we're going to go over and we're going to kill them all before God comes after us. Because if we don't fix it, then God's going to penalize us as well as them. And we don't want that. So they get the army together. Now, what are the facts? The facts are that the 2.5 tribes piled some stones up by the Jordan River. That we know. They piled up some stones. We're going to find out a little bit more about them in a minute. So they piled up the stones. As we move forward then, somebody comes to a bit of common sense. Says, well, rather than just have the army march over there and wipe them out, maybe we should send some people over to talk to them first. Sound like a good idea? So they send Phinehas, Eleazar's son, and leaders of the other 10 tribes. So they send this group of people over to talk to those tribes to find out what in the world is going on. What are you doing here? So when they go over, rather than asking a question, they tell them, you better not be doing this. They're saying what they already believe. What is this breach of faith you committed? And if you have built an altar for sacrifice to God, then you have had a breach of faith. You're doing something that God's commanded us not to do, and therefore that's a big problem. So they are very zealous, very eager to express their opinion. They express it in a very dynamic way, very forceful way. And they continue that if you rebel, God will be angry with all of us. See, that's the big point. If you've done something horrible here, as we have envisioned that you've done, then God's not only going to be angry with you, He's going to be angry with us. And we're all going to pay the price. And it's not a price that we're going to pay, so we're going to make sure this is dealt with. So now you get the response. What is this thing all about? They first of all called out, God knows that we didn't build this for sacrifice, and we want you to know what God knows. But if in fact God determines it was in rebellion, then don't spare us. Wipe us out. If we did this in rebellion to God, if we did this in a way contrary to what God has commanded, wipe us out. We deserve to be wiped out. Before we say exactly what it was for, I want to point out something that intrigues me and for a personal reason. They make a very significant point, at least it's significant to me, and one that you may not think about when you read it. But they make the statement that the Lord has made the Jordan a boundary. That is the way the land is divided up. You have the 2.5 tribes on the east side of the Jordan, and you have the 9.5 tribes on the west side of the Jordan. And so you have the Jordan as a boundary between them. Have you ever heard the statement, the kids from across the tracks? Well, when I grew up, it was the kids across the creek. In my county, in southern Indiana, there were 2 townships. The township that I lived in, we had our own elementary schools, but when you went to high school, you went across the creek to the other township where they had running water. And so they referred to us as the kids across the creek. Now, there are natural boundaries, dividing lines for people that people use. It may be a state line. It may be a river. We use state lines all the time, don't we? You know, those people over in Louisiana, those people over here, those people there. Across the river, across the creek, across the tracks. Even 3,000 years ago, you have the same thing going on. We have this boundary between us. Therefore, we're concerned that the people over here where the temple is, or where the tabernacle is now, where the temple will be, are going to say that, those people are on the other side of the river. And, they really don't do things the right way anymore. And they don't deserve to be here. They don't deserve to be called a part of us. We're better than they are because we have the temple. So they make it clear, we built this altar as a witness, as a testimony. It is to remind the people on both sides of the river that we are one people united, worshiping one God. And that's why they built this altar as a copy of the altar of the Lord. So it did look like the altar in a way. I mean, it was a cruder version most likely. They call it a copy of the altar of the Lord. Well, now, as we recognize that it is a copy of the altar of the Lord, we can understand a little better why the people on the west side were alarmed when they received word that this copy of their altar had been built over here by the Jordan. Because maybe now it is meant to be used for sacrifice in the same way that we are going to use the altar that we built for sacrifice. However, this now paints a totally different picture, doesn't it? They're saying that we were afraid that you were going to cast us off, disown us because we're on the other side of the river. We were afraid that we would then lose our relationship with you and with God this way. And so we built this copy to remind not just us and you, but future generations. Because you know that the children don't remember everything that the parents knew. And their children remember even less of what the grandparents knew. And their children will remember even less of what the great-grandparents knew. And so we are afraid. And so we want this altar to be here to remind your generations and our generations we are one people worshiping one God. Well, Phineas and the other 10 leaders looked at that and said, this is good. In fact, Phineas thought that this was an indication that the Lord was in their midst. And then when they took that message back to the rest of the people, everybody thought this was good. Everybody settled down and everybody was happy. 1 Corinthians chapter 8 is an important reminder to us when we start thinking about our opinions and facts. If anyone imagines that he knows something, he does not yet know as he ought to know. Isn't that the way we are, though? We imagine that we know so much. We imagine that we are so wise and we have so many important pieces of fact in our minds, and all we have in most cases is a bunch of opinions. See, we don't really know the way that we think that we know. Our understanding is limited. We don't understand the truth. God knows the truth. God wants us to be zealous for Him, just as the tribes on both sides of the river were zealous for God, wanting to do things for Him. But that zeal has to be tempered with understanding. So just as the 10 tribes did not go out and send the army down on the 2.5 tribes immediately, but sent people to discuss, first of all, what's going on, we have to be willing to step back and realize that we also don't understand everything that we think that we understand. We have to be open to the possibility that maybe there's more here than we have imagined. And so if you look at the discussion between those two, even though they thought they had a very contentious issue here ahead of them, they were still willing to discuss it in a reasonable manner. So we have to have respectful, reasonable discussion with others. And the conclusions have to be on facts, not like Sister Aloysius, who was looking for something just to substantiate an opinion. But we have to be looking for the facts that will enable us to even change an opinion should we find that, whoops, we did in fact mess up, as the Western tribes were willing to do. So we have lessons in how these tribes handled this situation that apply to us every day because we face these situations every day. And those unsubstantiated opinions that we have so many of, we have to make sure that we don't let those get out of control and cause us to do things that we shouldn't do.
I love to tell the story, 'twill be my theme in glory, to tell the old story of Jesus and his love.